Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, 4 weeks of famous philosophers, albeit a little bit late. In this video we are going to be looking at Bertrand Russell, founder of Analytic Philosophy, inventor of Type Theory, and most influential philosopher of the 20th century. Now, Bertrand Russell lived for nearly 100 years. Throughout his life, he not only made landmark accomplishments in the field of logic, but also wrote a wide range of books, which made the revolutions of philosophy and science of his times accessible to the general public. Though perhaps not the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, his work, geared for all levels of readers, inspired generations of academics and easily makes him the most influential. Here's a quote from Quine himself about Russell. "I think many of us were drawn to our profession by Russell's books. He wrote a spectrum of books for a graduated public, layman to specialist. We were beguiled by the wit and the sense of newfound clarity with respect to central traits of reality." Born in 1872 to a family of liberal, atheist British aristocrats, Russell lost much of his close family in his first few years of life. At the age of 1, he lost his godfather, John Stuart Mill. At 2, he lost his mother and sister. At 4, he lost his father. And at 6, he lost his grandfather, who was the former British Prime Minister. This left him to be raised by his very religious Presbyterian grandmother. He contemplated suicide during his early life because of this upbringing and only did not follow through because of a desire to learn more mathematics. At age 18, he had denounced religion and become an atheist due in part to reading the works of his godfather, John Stuart Mill. He studied at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he met a younger G.E. Moore and older Alfred North Whitehead, both who were influential throughout the rest of his life. While there, he married Alice Parasol Smith, whom he would later divorce, and wrote some of his most influential works, including On Denoting and Principia Mathematica, whose text was so long the manuscript was carried in a wheelbarrow to the printer. As a lecturer at the University of Cambridge, he met a young Wittgenstein, who he thought of as a protege that would carry on his work in logic. His pacifist activities during the First World War resulted in his dismissal from academia. He was even imprisoned for arguing against U.S. involvement in the war, though he enjoyed it as it gave him time to read and write without interruption. After the war, he traveled around the world to Russia, China, Japan, and America, married and eventually divorced Dora Black, and later married Patricia Spence. Though at the beginning of the Second World War, he once again advocated for pacifism, he eventually changed his tune with the rise of Hitler. During this time, he was appointed as a professor of City College of New York, but later dismissed because of his atheism and views on sex and marriage in his book, Marriage and Morals, which he claims is the text that won him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950. Einstein himself defended Russell in an open letter, famously saying of Russell, "Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." Russell went on to write his best-selling book, A History of Western Philosophy, survive a plane crash, get another divorce, remarry again, this time to Edith Finch, advocate against the USSR for nuclear disarmament, eventually landing himself in prison again, and against the Vietnam War. Russell died of influenza in 1970, living almost 100 years, not long after publishing a 3-volume autobiography. He had quite a life, which is why we just took 4 minutes to explain it. Along with Alfred North Whitehead, Russell wrote one of the most influential logical texts of all time, Principia Mathematica, an attempt to fulfill the promise of logicism and reduce mathematics to logic through the use of Russell's theory of types. It is generally considered to have failed, due in part to its inability to resolve certain paradoxes, such as what would later come to be known as Russell's paradox. This was simply the problem that the set of all sets that are not members of themselves cannot exist, since it could neither be a member of itself nor not be a member of itself. See my video on Russell's paradox for more on that paradox and why it posed something of a problem to this process. Russell was also an important influence in the founding of Analytic Philosophy and the rise of logical positivism. He thought that one of the principal goals of philosophy was to create a fully logical language in which everything could be reduced to relationships between logical atoms. And we vacated inferred entities for logical constructions that could either be broken down through the rules of logic into logical atoms or were themselves logical atoms. For more on this theory, check out my video on the correspondence theory of truth. Russell's famous theory of definite descriptions offered unique solutions to puzzles which plagued the philosophy of language. By claiming that names like Scott were importantly different from descriptions, definite descriptions like the author of Waverley, Russell was able to frame statements like the King of France is bald to be neither nonsensical nor needing to posit some non-existent entity to determine their truth value, by formalizing them as there exists some X which is the King of France, and for all Y, if Y is the King of France, Y is identical to X, and X is bald. Since the first conjunct is false, it's not the case that there exists some X which is the King of France, we can easily come up with the truth value for the statement without needing to posit some entity, the King of France. Check out my video on Russell's theory of definite descriptions for more on that. Wittgenstein, Russell's protege, famously said that Russell's books should be bound in two colors, those dealing with mathematical logic in red, and all students of philosophy should read them, those dealing with ethics and politics in blue, and no one should be allowed to read them. Throughout his life, Russell was active in advocating for and against a variety of political causes, and despite Wittgenstein's strong words, he did have some interesting and powerful views that were influential in his time. Though Russell did see his political views as generally divorced from his philosophy. Though widespread and diverse, one of the central features of his writing was a critique of power and the unequal distribution of power throughout the world, and in particular, political systems. Though perhaps not the greatest philosopher of his time, Russell was arguably the most influential of the 20th century due to the fact that he, like Voltaire, brought philosophy and science to the masses and popularized many of the concepts and arguments of his time. Equally as a political activist, he was frequently at the forefront of controversy, social change, and political discussions and debates throughout his very, very long life. Therefore, I give you Bertrand Russell, founder of Analytic Philosophy, inventor of type theory, and most influential philosopher of the 20th century. Next up, we're going to be doing George Edward Moore, most commonly known as G.E. Moore. Who knows when we're going to be getting to that? I would like to say it took so long to make this video because Russell has such a long life. Honestly, it took so long to make this video because I've been getting caught up in other projects. But stay tuned for that coming up at some point. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.